You're on the road again. The rhythm of the tires, the soft hum of air around your windows, a landscape that shifts only slightly with each passing mile. Maybe you're watching the sky change. Maybe you've stopped noticing. This is The Passenger, True Crime. And today we're pulling off the main highway. Not every mystery becomes legend. Not every case gets the spotlight of documentaries or courtroom drama. Some disappear quietly into obscurity, spoken of in low tones by locals and archived in old microfilm. The kind of stories that stay with a community long after the headlines fade. Today's story is one of those. The year was 1978. 5 men left a basketball game in Chico, California, and vanished. They were friends, teammates. All of them lived with intellectual disabilities or psychiatric conditions. They were known, loved, and cared for. And when their car was found abandoned days later on a remote mountain road, hundreds of miles off course, with no sign of struggle, the questions began. Months passed. When some of their bodies were finally discovered, the scene raised more questions than it answered. It was as if they had walked willingly into a wilderness that had no place for them. This is not a famous case, but it is a haunting one. It is the story of the Yuba County Five. In this first segment, we won't begin with their disappearance. We'll begin with the lives they lived before, the routines they loved, the towns they called home. Before the mystery took hold, there was comfort, predictability, and friendship. Let's go back to the beginning. Imagine a small town on the edge of farmland. There are no skyscrapers. The tallest structure might be the water tower or the bell at the county high school. Streets have names like Olive or Elm. Yards are wide. Dogs bark at passers-by. Everyone knows which neighbor works the night shift and which one bakes pies for church socials. This is Marysville, California, and nearby, Yuba City. In the 1970s, these two towns formed a modest community in the heart of Yuba County, close enough to Sacramento for the occasional day trip, but far enough to feel like a separate world. The economy was agricultural. The air often carried the scent of peach orchards, rice paddies, and fertilizer. People lived simply. Most households had one TV, one car, and 1 or 2 jobs to keep it all going. Children rode bikes until the streetlights came on. Mothers made casseroles with canned soup. Radios played AM stations with country, disco, and weather reports. It was, for many, a good place to live, but not a place where much changed. And in that quiet rhythm of days lived 5 men, 5 lives, 1 circle. They were friends, teammates, sons, each with unique personalities but tightly connected by familiarity and shared understanding. Their names were Gary Dale Mathias, age 25, Jack Madruga, age 30, Bill Sterling, 29, Ted Wire, age 32, Jackie Jack Hewitt, age 24. They were known locally, not infamous, not extraordinary, just familiar. Let's get to know them. Ted Wire. Ted lived with his mother in Olivehurst. He was the oldest of the group, a gentle presence who loved basketball, Special Olympics, and watching television. He had worked at a snack bar for a while and sometimes helped with lawn care. Ted was chatty, a friendly soul who greeted people with a grin and remembered names. He had an IQ of about 70 and functioned well with structure. His mother made sure he had clean clothes, and she always turned down his bed just the way he liked it. He depended on her for stability, and he returned that care with trust. Ted's quirks were simple. He disliked cold weather. He didn't like change. He'd get upset if things didn't go as expected, but in his routine, he was deeply content. Bill Sterling. Bill was a tall, slim man, sometimes described as shy but friendly. He was also religious, deeply so. He often read the Bible aloud to old people in nursing homes and believed in doing good wherever he could. His family remembered him as deeply sensitive, someone who cried easily when others were in pain. He and Ted were particularly close. They spent hours talking about their dreams and goals. Sometimes those goals were simple: a game, a weekend trip, a snack from the store. Jack Hewitt. The youngest of the group, Jack was playful and quiet. He loved watching TV and had a childlike affection for animals. especially his family's dog. Though diagnosed with a learning disability, he was described as slow but not stupid. He was quick to smile and eager to help. He didn't function well without direction but thrived in the predictable bubble of his home life. If asked to go somewhere, he usually said yes, especially if one of his friends was going. Jack Madruga. Jack owned the car, a Mercury Montego. He had served in the U.S. Army and received an honorable discharge. Jack had no diagnosed intellectual disability, but was considered slow by his family and community. He'd worked as a dishwasher and at a snack food plant, but lost jobs due to performance issues. He didn't like to share his car and didn't let others drive it. That detail will become important later. He was a proud man, quiet, serious, with a sense of responsibility toward his friends. Gary Mathias. Gary stood out from the others. He'd served in the U.S. Army as well, but was discharged due to a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. His condition had once caused violent episodes and psychosis. But by 1978, he was stable. He was on antipsychotic medication and regularly visited a local outpatient clinic. Gary was gregarious. He made jokes. He had ambition. He wanted to move out, get a full-time job, maybe get married. He was seen as a leader in the group. Not in a domineering way, but in the way someone becomes a reference point. If Gary was going, others felt it was safe. The five were not institutionalized. They were not outcasts. They were simply five young men trying to live good lives within their limitations. Every week, the five friends practiced basketball through a program for intellectually disabled adults. Their team, the Gateway Gators, was more than a hobby. It was a source of pride. They had a big game coming up, part of the Special Olympics in Sacramento. The winners would get a free trip to Los Angeles. That prize mattered, not just because of the travel, but because it symbolized achievement, normalcy, and inclusion. They talked about the game all week. Ted's mother had even laid out his uniform. It was neatly folded on his bed. He had told her not to let him oversleep. He was excited. They were expected at the Gators game on Saturday morning, February 25th, and when Friday came, they had a plan. There was a college basketball game that night in Chico, about 50 miles north. They'd drive up, watch the game, and be home that night in time to rest for their own tournament in the morning. That Friday was the last fully known day of their lives. Friday, February 24th, 1978. The men left sometime in the late afternoon. They piled into Jack Madruga's Mercury, Gary in front, the others in back. The weather was cool. The sky was clear. The car ran well. They arrived at the California State University, Chico campus in time for the game. The CSU Chico Wildcats were playing the UC Davis Aggies. It was a typical Friday night game, and the men cheered loudly. Several attendees remembered them, not because they were disruptive, but because of their enthusiasm. They seemed happy, untroubled. After the game, around 10 p.m., they stopped at a Bears Market, a small grocery store near the campus. A clerk would later recall selling them: one Hostess cherry pie, one Hostess lemon pie, one Snickers bar, one Langendorf jelly roll, 1 quart of milk, 2 Pepsis. That detail, mundane as it seems, was one of the last certain snapshots of their existence. Comfort food, familiarity, the kind of snacks you buy for a long ride home, or maybe for something else. They got back in the car, and then they vanished. Up to that moment, nothing about their journey was unusual, nothing at all. They had watched a game, they had snacks, they had a plan to be home in time for their own big game the next morning. Imagine being one of their parents, waking early the next day to pack a bag or make breakfast, waiting for the front door to open. But it never does. Imagine calling the others. "Have you seen Ted? Did Gary make it home?" No, no one's seen them. 5 households, 5 worried mothers, 5 sets of phone calls that lead nowhere. Within 24 hours, they are reported missing, and by Sunday the search begins. But it will be days before the first clue emerges, and when it does, it won't be anywhere near the road home. Early spring, Northern California. The kind of chill that clings to the ground well into morning, no matter how brightly the sun appears to shine. You're following a winding road upward, not toward anything really, just up. And the trees grow denser, the air colder. Something feels off. This was the world into which the Yuba County Five disappeared. 5 men, 1 car, a familiar route home from a basketball game. But by Saturday morning, February 25, 1978, none of them had returned, and no one knew why. Their families were the first to raise the alarm. Ted Wyer's mother remembers the moment she realized something was wrong. He hadn't come home. His bed hadn't been slept in. The basketball uniform she had laid out the night before was untouched. He was supposed to be at the tournament in Sacramento by 9 a.m., but he wasn't. None of them were. At first, there was hesitation. These were grown men, not children. While some had developmental or psychiatric conditions, they'd gone out on their own before. Maybe they stopped somewhere. Maybe the car broke down. Maybe they stayed overnight with someone and forgot to call. But as Saturday afternoon became evening, then stretched into Sunday, the anxiety settled into something deeper. Fear. Calls to friends turned up nothing. No one had seen them after they left Chico. None had shown up to the Special Olympics game. Their team forfeited. That was unthinkable for these men, especially Ted, who lived for games like this. Their parents filed official missing persons reports. Police began asking questions, but there was no obvious place to look. They were last seen at the college basketball game in Chico. The route back to Yuba County was simple. Highway 99 south. A direct 50-mile path through flat farmland. Straightforward, populated, well lit, but they didn't take it. On Tuesday, February 28th, 4 days after the game, park ranger patrolling in the Sierra Nevada foothills made a discovery. About 70 miles from Chico and well east into the Plumas National Forest, he found a car abandoned on a remote winding road near Rogers Cow Camp, just below snowline, roughly at 4,400 feet elevation. It was Jack Madruga's Mercury Montego. The road wasn't just out of the way. It was completely off course from any sensible return path to Yuba City or Marysville. To get there, the men would have had to leave Highway 99, drive east through the town of Oroville, and continue upward on twisting mountain roads for over an hour. The location was remote, wooded, and, in late February, covered in snow. The car had been lightly snowed on, but not buried. There was no sign of foul play. The doors were unlocked. One window was rolled down. Inside, the wrappers from the snacks they bought at Bear's Market still sat on the seats. The gas tank was a quarter full. The tires hadn't been spun, suggesting the car wasn't stuck when it was abandoned. Curiously, the undercarriage was undamaged, despite the steep, rough terrain leading to the site. Investigators later noted that Jack must have been driving very carefully to avoid damaging the low-clearance Mercury on that road. But the car was stopped, and there was no one in it. No tracks, no signs of struggle, no blood, just silence and forest. The question was simple. Why were they there? Initial speculation covered the usual ground. Maybe they got lost. Maybe they were following someone. Maybe it was a joyride, or they took a wrong turn. But these explanations didn't sit well with their families. First, none of them had expressed any interest in visiting the mountains. In fact, several of them, including Ted Wyer, actively disliked the cold. Second, the route from Chico to Yuba City was easy to follow. Even if they missed a turn, they would have noticed. Third, Jack Madruga never let anyone else drive his car. And he hated dirt roads. He was meticulous about his vehicle and didn't enjoy unpaved areas, much less remote mountain passes. Their families insisted. Something had to have led them up there, something or someone. But there were no answers, only snow and silence. Search teams combed the area. Helicopters scanned from above. Ground teams on skis and snowmobiles patrolled the trails. No footprints, no clothing, no bodies. Winter in the Sierras is cold and deadly. Temperatures at night drop to the low 20s Fahrenheit. Hypothermia would be a certainty for anyone exposed too long without shelter. Weeks passed, then months. The snow began to melt. On June 4th, 1978, nearly 4 months after the disappearance, a group of motorcyclists riding near a Forest Service trailer in Daniel Zink campground, about 20 miles northeast of the car, noticed something unusual. The trailer had a broken window. Inside, a body. It was Ted Wire. He was found on a bed in the service trailer, wrapped in 8 sheets, including one tightly around his head. He was emaciated, around 120 pounds, down from over 200. His feet were severely frostbitten. There was no food in his stomach, though emergency rations in the cabin, including canned meals and freeze-dried supplies, had been partially used. One locker nearby contained additional rations, enough to feed several men for weeks. But it had never been opened. The trailer had a propane tank connected to a heating system, but it had not been activated. Ted's beard growth and body condition suggested he had survived up to 13 weeks after the car was abandoned. 13 weeks. Imagine the cold, the isolation, the waiting. Near the trailer, searchers also found the remains of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling, located about 11 miles from the car. Their bodies had been partially scavenged by animals. It appeared they died in the open, trying to walk through the forest. A few days later, Jackie Hewitt's spine was found 2 miles northeast of the trailer. His shoes and part of his skull were nearby. Clothing confirmed his identity. But Gary Mathias, the 5th member of the group, was never found. Only his tennis shoes were recovered inside the trailer near Ted's body. This suggested he had been there, at least for a time. Some believe Gary may have taken Ted's leather shoes to continue traveling in the cold. Others speculate he went for help and never returned. Despite an extensive search, no sign of him was ever discovered. Piecing together the events required working backward from the available evidence. February 24th, 1978. The men attend the basketball game in Chico. Purchase snacks. Depart. February 25th, early morning. The Mercury Montego is driven eastward into the Sierra Nevada mountains. Location unknown until days later. February 28th. The car is discovered abandoned on a forest road. June 4-7. 4 bodies are found. Ted in a trailer, others in the surrounding forest. Gary remains missing. In the trailer, investigators found maps, books, clothing, and rations. There was even a watch which didn't belong to any of the men. This suggested someone else, perhaps another camper or unknown party, had been in the trailer at some point. Ted had lived the longest, but he hadn't left. He hadn't lit a fire. He hadn't used the propane. He hadn't opened the locker with more food. Why? Was he afraid? Was he injured? Was he waiting for Gary to return? And why had they walked nearly 20 miles into the snow-covered wilderness, without coats, flashlights, or winter gear, after the car stopped? Gary Mathias, the only one with a psychiatric history, became the focus of many theories. His military record and previous psychotic episodes raised speculation. Could he have led them into the woods in a delusional state? His doctor didn't believe so. Gary had been stable for years. He maintained a job part-time, attended therapy, and showed no recent signs of psychosis. He was taking his medication and was closely monitored. Furthermore, his parents emphasized that Gary would not have deliberately endangered his friends. He had grown up with them. They were close, especially with Jack and Ted. He was seen as protective, not erratic. Still, his absence added an unsettling layer. If Gary survived longer, why didn't he seek help? If he perished, why wasn't his body found? To this day, Gary Mathias's whereabouts remain unknown. Officially, he is listed as a missing person. As investigators reviewed the case, they continued asking the most basic question: why? Why abandon the car? Why walk uphill into deeper snow? Why not turn around? No clear answers have emerged, but a few key details still provoke discussion. The unused resources. Ted died in a trailer with working heat, unspoiled food, and tools. He never used the heater, never broke into the supply locker. Why was he waiting, unable to figure it out? Or did he believe someone was coming back? The shoes. Gary's shoes were in the trailer, but Gary was gone. Did he swap them with Ted's, then leave? If so, where did he go? No footprints, no bones, no sightings. The wrong turn. The road to Rogers' cow camp was not on the route home. There was no reason for them to be there. Some speculate they followed the wrong car or were scared off the highway. Others wonder if they met someone, perhaps a stranger, and were led astray. The watch found in the trailer was a gold watch that belonged to none of the men. Could someone else have entered the trailer? Did they meet a third party in the woods? Or had someone already been there and left before them? Each clue complicates the picture. Each detail raises more uncertainty. And across it all lies a heavy silence, the kind that clings to pine needles and frozen ground. The case of the Yuba County Five is full of what might be called soft mysteries. Not of violence or obvious conspiracy, but of behavior. A series of decisions that don't make sense when seen from the outside. A path chosen that leads away from safety. A car left behind. A stocked trailer turned into a tomb. It isn't just the tragedy that haunts. It's the dissonance. The quiet lack of explanation. The core puzzle. Why go that way? Let us begin with the most enduring question of all. Why did the five men drive into the mountains? The most direct explanation is disorientation or an accidental wrong turn. But this theory becomes difficult when you map the route. From Chico to Yuba City, Highway 99 leads straight south. Instead, the car was found nearly 80 miles northeast, on a rural road known only to locals, well into the Plumas National Forest. That path requires several purposeful turns through small towns and up winding elevation. One theory suggests they were following someone. Perhaps they picked up a stranger, or saw something that made them veer off the main road. But no witnesses came forward, and no one has ever confirmed seeing them after they left Chico. Another theory is that they may have been planning to visit Forbstown, where Gary Mathias had a friend. But Forbstown, while east of Oroville, is nowhere near the eventual location, and none of the men had spoken of such a plan. It's as though they vanished into another logic, one that still evades us. Some of the most uncomfortable speculation in this case involves the men's cognitive and psychiatric conditions. All five were considered vulnerable adults, some due to intellectual disabilities, others due to chronic mental illness. But their families and caretakers are quick to emphasize they were not helpless. They were responsible. They were functional in day-to-day life, especially within their routines. This routine-based living may be one key to understanding their actions. Several experts have suggested that, when presented with an unexpected obstacle, such as a blocked road or a sudden fear, the men may have panicked and reverted to decision-making that seemed irrational from the outside, but internally felt like what we're supposed to do. In group psychology, this is called groupthink under stress, where individual logic dissolves and consensus forms around one strong personality or a shared sense of urgency, regardless of how irrational the action may seem. If they were disoriented and cold and believed they were near help or danger, continuing on foot, even uphill into snow, might have felt like their only choice. But then there's the question of the trailer. The trailer where Ted Wire died was a standard U.S. Forest Service outpost, not well known to the public. It was intended for temporary use by seasonal employees, and located about 19 miles from the car, as the crow flies, though likely more than 25 miles by foot through uneven terrain. It was stocked with emergency rations, sleeping bags, a heating system, matches, and fuel. Yet much of it was unused. One window had been broken to gain access. So clearly, they knew how to get in. Ted made it inside. He found blankets. He found food. But he didn't light a fire. He didn't use the gas heater. He didn't open the storage locker with additional supplies. Why? Some believe he was simply too cold and too weak. He may have been injured. Others believe Gary Mathias, the one who had military experience, had gone out for help and told Ted to wait. Perhaps Ted trusted him and stayed put. But this raises another question. Why didn't Gary come back? Gary remains the greatest enigma of the case, as the only one with a history of schizophrenia. Early theories leaned toward a possible psychotic break, but there is little evidence to support this. By all accounts, Gary had been doing well in the months leading up to the trip. He was on medication, in treatment, and employed part-time. His family and doctors agreed he was stable. If anything, Gary may have been the most capable among them in survival terms. He had been stationed in West Germany during his time in the army and had some basic training. He also had navigational experience, a possible reason why the others might have followed him into the woods. Inside the trailer, searchers found Gary's tennis shoes, left behind, perhaps exchanged for Ted's more durable leather ones. This suggests he had been there. But what happened after? He may have gone looking for help and gotten lost, or he may have perished further into the wilderness, his body hidden by terrain or scavenged beyond recognition. Still, it's unusual that no trace of him was ever found, not even bones, clothing, or belongings. To this day, Gary Mathias is listed as missing. The unknown third-party theory. Over the years, some have speculated about a possible third party, a stranger they picked up, or someone they encountered in the mountains. This theory stems from two curious details. The car was found in good condition, neatly parked on a snow-covered dirt road. No sign of a crash, no struggle, no haste. The trailer contained a gold watch, not belonging to any of the men, and scattered signs of someone having used the space but not in a systematic way. Could someone have led them up there? Could they have followed a false lead, or even been frightened off the road? One witness, Joseph Shans, came forward months later with a strange story. On the night of February 24th, Shans was in the area where the Mercury Montego was later found. He said he had driven his car into a snowbank and was suffering a mild heart attack. While lying inside his vehicle, he saw headlights behind him. A group of people, men and a woman with a baby according to his recollection, walked by. He called for help, but they reportedly ignored him. He later saw a flashlight beam moving outside. By morning, no one was around. His story remains unconfirmed, and no woman or child was ever linked to the case. But his testimony added yet another strange thread to an already tangled fabric. At its heart, the Yuba County Five case taps into a primal human fear, not just of getting lost, but of getting lost in a place we think we understand. California in the 1970s was full of contrasts. Bustling cities just miles from vast wilderness, rapid development pressing up against old logging trails and forgotten service roads. The illusion of proximity, that you were always just a few miles from safety, could be dangerously misleading. The men weren't backpackers, they weren't mountain hikers. They had no business being in that part of the forest, but they ended up in it anyway. And the wilderness, as it so often does, didn't care. In some ways, this is what haunts people most about the case. Not evil, not conspiracy, but the quiet, indifferent danger of nature, and the subtle misjudgments that lead ordinary people into deadly situations. There's a psychological term used to describe the uncomfortable zones between the familiar and the foreign: liminality. It means a threshold, a space where the rules are uncertain, a place between two identities, two realities, or two ways of understanding the world. The Yuba County Five entered a liminal space, from the warmth and light of a college basketball game into the icy silence of a mountain night, and they never made it back across. It is this liminality, between rationality and mystery, intention and confusion, that leaves the case unsettled in our minds. Not because we fear being murdered, but because we fear losing our grip on sense, on order, on the assumptions that protect our daily lives. What if a single wrong turn, a single unfamiliar sound could unravel all of that? What if survival depends not just on strength or skill, but on being able to understand the world around you when it stops making sense? And what if one winter night in 1978, 5 men fell through that understanding, into a space they couldn't come back from? There is a quiet tragedy at the core of the Yuba County Five story that extends beyond the mystery itself. It lies in how these 5 men were seen, and not seen, by the society around them. Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, Ted Wire, Jack Madruga, Gary Mathias. They were sons, friends, laughing companions, helpers at home. Some held jobs, others took part in community programs. They attended church, helped neighbors with chores, played sports. Their lives were quiet, structured, routine. Not extraordinary by the world's standards, but deeply valued by those who knew them. And yet, they were marginalized, not in a loud or violent way, but in that subtle, institutionalized manner that defines much of 20th century America's relationship with intellectual disability. Even in 1978, the term mentally retarded, a now antiquated and offensive phrase, was the official classification. Services existed, yes, but they were fragmented. Support networks were often makeshift. Families bore most of the responsibility, and social attitudes hovered somewhere between discomfort and dismissal. In media reports following the disappearance, the men were often referred to as boys, despite being in their 20s and 30s. Headlines emphasized their disabilities more than their humanity. There was, in many accounts, an air of dismissal, as if their disappearance was tragic, yes, but less surprising somehow, as though getting lost was inevitable for people like that. This, perhaps, is one of the more painful aspects of the case. The lack of urgency that trailed the initial search. The confusion about who they were. The way their lives, so full of normalcy and structure, were instantly reframed as fragile, odd, or unknowable. Each of the men lived with some form of developmental or psychiatric condition, ranging from mild intellectual disability to paranoid schizophrenia. But they also lived with autonomy. They rode the bus independently, shopped at local stores, played sports competitively. They were capable of attending a basketball game an hour from home and returning on their own. They had done similar trips before, and yet, the way their disappearances were investigated often betrayed an assumption that they were less capable than they truly were. Ted Wyer's mother described how, in the early days of the search, police seemed unconcerned. She said they suggested that maybe the boys just went on a little trip. It wasn't until the car was found, in snow, miles from any road they should have been on, that authorities took the case seriously. And even then, the narrative often focused on their impairments, not their personalities. This is not a condemnation of those officers or of the time, but it reflects a cultural blind spot, the inability or unwillingness to see vulnerable adults as whole individuals with identities beyond their diagnoses. At the time of their disappearance, California's care systems for intellectually disabled adults were undergoing significant transitions. Large residential hospitals, once the default, were being phased out. The movement toward deinstitutionalization meant more people with disabilities were living at home or in community settings. While this was progress in theory, it often lacked the infrastructure to support them fully. Parents and families, like those of the Yuba Five, were left to fill the gap. They worked tirelessly to provide structure, routine, safety, but were largely unsupported. In some ways, the tragedy reflects that systemic absence. Had there been stronger community programs, better emergency resources, more public understanding, would someone have noticed the car sooner? Would the men have received more help navigating fear, confusion, or disorientation in unfamiliar territory? Would they have been found sooner? These are unanswerable questions, but they echo across many similar cases even today. The Yuba County Five case also highlights how society constructs narratives about people with disabilities. Especially when tragedy strikes, there is a tendency to reduce, to simplify, to flatten complexity into labels. The mentally disabled men, the schizophrenic, the retarded boys. These were common phrases used at the time, but this strips them of nuance, of the fact that Jack Madruga served in the Army, that Gary Mathias held a job and managed his mental illness, that Jack Hewitt loved comic books, that Bill Sterling memorized sports trivia, that Ted Wyer could recite entire comedy routines from memory. They were funny. They were dependable. They had hobbies, tempers, preferences, quirks. And when they died, when their bodies were found months later spread across a forest, that richness of life risked being buried alongside them. But it shouldn't be. The way we remember people matters. The language we use matters. And the more we acknowledge their full humanity, the closer we get to understanding not just what happened to them, but what was lost. In the decades since the case went cold, the Yuba County Five have become a quiet footnote in true crime history, rarely mentioned in the same breath as louder, more brutal cases. But those who return to the story, readers, listeners, documentarians, often find themselves haunted not by malice, but by sadness, by how little it would have taken to save them. A warm shelter, a found trail, a little more understanding from the world around them. And perhaps that is what remains most urgent about this case. The reminder that we must build a society where vulnerability is not a death sentence, where help is not far away, where support does not depend on assumptions. The Yuba Five were not lost in some metaphorical sense. They were quite literally abandoned by the terrain, by circumstance, and by a culture that wasn't built to catch people like them when the world shifted beneath their feet. They deserve more than mystery, they deserve memory. The Yuba County Five story is one of disorientation, of systems that failed quietly, and of 5 men whose lives ended not with spectacle, but with silence. And yet, in returning to their story, in telling it with care, we offer something back. We remind the world that their names matter, that their lives mattered, that every person deserves to be seen in full, not just as a subject of mystery, but as a part of our shared human fabric. Thank you for taking this journey with us. If this story moved you or made you think, we invite you to gently support the channel. Leave a comment with your thoughts. We read everyone. Subscribe if you'd like more stories told in this calm, thoughtful way. And as always, take care out there. The world is vast, but you are not alone.